Thank you very much for that warm welcome. Let me first apologize. I'm going to speak in English. You would not want to hear my Italian. I thought that this morning I would give you an introduction to the work that I've spent most of my career on. It's called mechanism design theory, and the reason I'd like to talk about it is that I think that it could be useful in the work that the Fondazione con il SUD is doing here in southern Italy. It's a theoretical subject, but it has, I think you will agree, some important practical implications. So I'll begin by giving you a short definition of the field of mechanism design, but then I will go very quickly to a few examples, because I think it's in the examples that you will see what the theory is trying to do. But first, a definition. Mechanism design is the engineering part of economics. A lot of the time in economics, we take existing economic institutions and we try to understand what kinds of outcomes those institutions will generate. This is what is called the positive or predictive part of economics, and that's what most economists do. But I'm interested in just the opposite. I'm interested in mechanism design which reverses the direction. In mechanism design, we start with the outcomes. We first say, these are the outcomes that we would like to achieve, and then we work backwards to inquire, are there institutions, are there mechanisms that could be designed that would achieve these outcomes we would like to have. So the outcomes are our dreams, and the mechanisms are the way that we get to those dreams. And we want to know what form these mechanisms, these institutions will take. That's what I do. And this is what is called the normative part of, or prescriptive part of economics. Well, that may not mean very much to you, because it's all very abstract. So let me go straight to a little example. This is an example that may well be familiar to you from your own home life. So imagine that there is a mother who has a cake that she would like to divide between her two children, Alice and Bob. And her goal is to make sure that the cake is divided in such a way that each child is happy with the piece that he or she has received. In other words, Bob should think that he has at least half the cake, and Alice should think that she has at least half the cake. And if that goal is achieved, we'll say that the mother has accomplished a fair division. And if your family is anything like mine, if the division is not fair, it's a catastrophe. So how does the mother achieve a fair division? Well, if the mother knows that the children see the cake the same way that she does, there's a simple solution. She can simply take a knife and cut the cake exactly in two from her point of view, but she knows that the children will see the cake the same way that she does, so they will also think that the cake has been cut exactly in half. Each child gets one of the pieces, and that's the end of the story. The problem is that children almost never see things the same way that their parents do. So the mother may think that she's cut the cake exactly in two, but Bob may think that Alice's piece is bigger. And quite possibly, Alice will think that Bob's piece is bigger. And so what can the mother do? Well, the problem is that although the mother wants to achieve a fair division, she doesn't have enough information to do that on her own because she doesn't know how Bob and Alice view the cake. She doesn't know what a fair division even is because she is missing this important information. So the question is, despite the lack of information, can she introduce a mechanism that will result in a fair division? That's the mechanism design problem. Well, it turns out that this problem of dividing a cake is actually very old. It goes back literally thousands of years. If you know the Bible, you'll recognize that dividing a cake fairly is exactly the same as the problem that Lot and Abraham faced when they discussed dividing grazing land between the two of them. This was in the Old Testament. Well, just as the problem is presented in the Bible, the solution is also presented in the Bible. And in terms of cake, here is how the solution works. One of the children, say Bob, should divide the cake in two. And the other child, Alice, should choose the piece that she wants for herself. So Bob divides, Alice chooses. Now you may ask, why does this work? It works because when Bob is cutting the cake, he has a strong incentive to cut it in such a way that the two pieces are exactly equal from his point of view. Why? Because if one of the pieces is bigger, he knows Alice is going to take that one. So when he's cutting, he will make sure that whichever piece Alice takes, he is happy with the other one. So Bob will be happy, and Alice will be happy because she gets to choose the piece that she likes best. So both children are happy, and the mother has achieved a fair division. So you may say, well, this is not terribly important. Who cares about dividing cake? But nevertheless, the example illustrates some of the important features of the theory. In particular, the mother herself, the mechanism designer, doesn't know in advance what the best outcome is. And so she has to go indirectly. She has to use this mechanism, the divide and choose mechanism, to achieve a fair division. And furthermore, the participants themselves, Alice and Bob, don't care about the mother's goals. The mother wants to achieve a fair division. Alice and Bob don't care about a fair division. All they want is more cake. So the mechanism has to take into account the fact that the participants' goals may not be the same as the mechanism designer's goals. Okay, so that's a simple example to get started with. Let's move to a slightly more complicated example. This is an example which is inspired by the city by the issues that have arisen here in the south of Italy. Let's imagine that there is a foundation who wants to use a piece of land that it has acquired for renewable energy. It wants to allocate the right to use this land to an energy company who will use the land for producing solar energy or perhaps wind energy. This is exactly the issue that the Community Foundation of Messina has recently faced. So let's imagine that there are several energy companies who are interested in the right to use this land for energy production. They're interested in the license to use the land. What the foundation would like to do is to put the license into the hands of the company that values the license the most, because that company will create the most value for society as a whole. That company will achieve the efficient outcome. The problem is that the foundation doesn't know which of these companies values the license the most. So it doesn't know the best outcome. Well, what can it do? The foundation could ask each company, how much do you value the license? And then give the license to the company that says it values it the most. But the problem is that if companies understand that they have a better chance of getting the license if they quote a higher figure, then they have a strong incentive to exaggerate the value that they place on the license. And if all companies are exaggerating, then the foundation doesn't know which company really values the license the most. So that mechanism will not work very well. Let's look at a slightly more sophisticated mechanism. The foundation could have each company make a bid for the license and award the license to the company that has made the highest bid, and have the winner pay its bid. Well, this will work a little bit better because now companies will no longer exaggerate their bids, since they have to pay what they have bid if they win. But this mechanism will not work either, because now companies have an incentive to understate their values. So it's just the opposite. Let me explain why that's so. Suppose that you're a company, an energy company called SolarMax. And suppose that the license, if you get the license, it will be worth €1 million to you. Well, will you bid €1 million? If you did bid $1 million and you won, you would be getting something worth $1 million, but you would be paying $1 million, and so your net profit would be zero. You might as well have not bothered participating in the first place. So you're not going to bid $1 million. You're going to bid less than $1 million, because then, if you win, you will get a positive profits. You will get $1 million minus the amount that you've bid. The problem is that if all bidders are bidding less than their values, if they're all understating, once again, there's no guarantee that the right company will win, the company that values the license the most. So once again, there's a mechanism design problem. And once again, there is a solution. And here is the solution. It's very simple, but really quite clever. Once again, every company should make a bid for the license. And once again, the winner should be the company that has made the highest bid, but instead of paying its own bid, the winner should pay the second highest bid. So, for example, if there are three bidders and one bids €1,000,000 and one bids 800,000 and one bids 500,000, then the winner should be the company that bids $1,000,000 because that's the highest bid, but it should pay only 800,000 because that's the second highest bid. Now, I claim that now companies have the incentive to bid exactly what the license is worth to them. They have no incentive. First of all, they have no incentive to understate because they don't actually pay their own bids anyway. If I'm SolarMax and the license is worth $1,000,000 to me, if I bid $1,000,000, I don't pay that $1,000,000. I pay the second highest bid. So I have no incentive to understate. And furthermore, if I do understate, I may lose the license altogether. That is, if I bid 800,000, but there's some other company that bids 900,000, then I'll lose by bidding 800,000. I would have been better off bidding $1,000,000. If I had bid $1,000,000, I would have won, and I would have had €100,000 profit, 1,000,000 minus 900,000. So understating is never a good idea, and it might be a very bad idea because I might lose the license altogether. So if I'm SolarMax, I'm not going to understate. But I also don't want to overstate because if I bid €1.2 million and it's only worth $1,000,000 to me, I might run the risk that some other company bids €1.1 million. I will win, but I will pay too much. I will pay €1.1 million. That's more than it's worth to me. So I don't want to overstate either. And that means that the only thing left is to bid exactly what the license is worth to me. That's what I should do. And if all companies are bidding exactly what the license is worth to them, the winner will be the company that values the license the most. And so we have once again solved the problem. Thank you. Let me give you one more example. And this is also an example inspired by this part of the world. It's inspired by the city of Napoli. Let's imagine, though, that it's a city somewhat smaller than Napoli. It has two people, Alice and Bob. I'm going to limit it to two people to make the discussion simpler. So these two citizens, Alice and Bob, are interested in improvements to the city. And there's a foundation which wants to restore some important part of the city. The foundation has to choose which restoration project it's going to actually go ahead with. There are four possibilities. One is to restore the catacombs. Another is to restore the beautiful church San Lorenzo Maggiore. Another is to restore the palace, Palazzo Scarpa. And the fourth possibility is to restore the zoo. And the question is, which project should they choose? Well, this will depend on what Alice and Bob wants. Alice and Bob are the citizens of the city. The restoration project should be chosen so that Alice and Bob are happy. But the problem, of course, is that the foundation may not know what Alice and Bob really want. Let's imagine that there are two possibilities for what Alice and Bob want. I'll call them two different states of the world. In state one, Alice and Bob don't care very much about the future. They care mostly about what's happening today. And in state two, they put much more weight on the future than today. They're looking ahead to the future. So the foundation doesn't know whether Alice and Bob care mostly about today or they are patient and they will wait till the future. Now, if let's be a bit more specific about what Alice and Bob want. If Alice cares, let's imagine that Alice cares mostly about the historical value of these different restoration projects. So if she cares mostly about today, she's going to prefer the catacombs to the other projects because she thinks the catacombs have the most historical value. So she likes the catacombs best, then San Lorenzo, then the zoo, and she puts the palazzo down at the bottom because the palazzo in its current state is so run down that it doesn't seem to have much historical value. But if she looks ahead to the future, if she's the type of person who looks ahead to the future, then she's going to like the palazzo the most because she believes the palazzo can be improved to have much more historic value. So if state two is the true state, she prefers the palazzo first, then the catacombs, then the zoo, and now San Lorenzo comes at the bottom. Now, what about Bob? Let's imagine that Bob cares mostly about the beauty of these various sites. So if he's looking at the sites today, he likes the palazzo the most because that's the most beautiful today, then San Lorenzo, then the zoo, and then he puts the catacombs at the bottom. But if he's patient and he looks ahead to the future, he puts San Lorenzo at the top because he thinks that San Lorenzo and he puts the catacombs second. He thinks San Lorenzo and the catacombs can be improved through restoration to make them more beautiful. So what I've just done is to describe Alice and Bob's possible preferences. Up on the screen, you'll see that I've listed two possibilities. There's state one, there's state two. In state one, this is Alice's ranking, this is Bob's ranking, but their rankings are different depending on which is the actual state. And the problem is that the foundation doesn't know which is the actual state. The foundation would like to choose a project which makes a good compromise between what Alice wants and what Bob wants. So if state one is the true state, then San Lorenzo would be a good choice. It would be a good compromise between what Alice and Bob want. Notice that the catacombs is not a good choice because although Alice likes the catacombs a lot, Bob puts the catacombs down at the bottom. So catacombs would not be a good choice, a good compromise. And the palazzo would not be a good choice because Alice doesn't like the palazzo, and the zoo would not be a good choice because both Alice and Bob prefer San Lorenzo to the zoo. San Lorenzo is above the zoo for Alice and also for Bob. So San Lorenzo is the right choice in state 1, and the catacombs is the right choice in state 2. It makes a good compromise in state 2. The Palazzo is not a good choice because Bob doesn't like the Palazzo, Alice doesn't like San Lorenzo, and neither Alice nor Bob think the zoo is very good. They both prefer the catacombs. So if the foundation knows the states, then it will choose San Lorenzo in state 1, catacombs in state 2. The problem is it doesn't know the states. So what can it do? Well, it could simply ask Alice and Bob, what are your preferences? What is the state? But once again, that's not going to work very well, because look at Alice's preferences. Alice always prefers the catacombs to San Lorenzo. In state 1, she prefers the catacombs to San Lorenzo. In state 2, she prefers the catacombs to San Lorenzo. And she knows that if the foundation thinks that state 2 is the truth, the foundation will choose the catacombs. So she will always say state 2, even if state 1 is the truth, in order to increase the chance that the catacombs will be chosen. Bob will do just the opposite. Bob will say state 1 because Bob always prefers San Lorenzo to the catacombs. Bob prefers San Lorenzo to the catacombs in state 1. Bob prefers San Lorenzo to the catacombs in state 2. So Bob will always say state 1 because that's when the San Lorenzo is chosen. But if Bob always says state 1 and Alice always says state 2, the poor foundation has no idea what the actual state is. It will have no idea what to do. So simply asking the citizens to reveal the state won't work either. So what can the foundation do? Well, once again, there's a simple mechanism that works, and it's given by this little table here. So what does this table mean? Well, in this table, Alice has two choices. She can choose the top row, or she can choose the bottom row. Bob also has two choices. He can choose the left column, or he can choose the right column. And given Alice and Bob's choices, the outcome is in the corresponding box. So if Alice chooses the bottom row, for example, and Bob chooses the right column, the outcome is going to be the catacombs, because that's the box corresponding to those choices. So what will happen if this mechanism is actually executed, if Alice and Bob actually participate in this mechanism? Well, that will depend on the state. Let's suppose that state 1, where Alice and Bob have these preferences, is the true state. Notice that if Bob thinks if Alice thinks that Bob is going to play the left column, Alice is going to play the top row. Because if she plays the top row, then San Lorenzo is the outcome. If she plays the bottom row, the Palazzo is the outcome. And notice that in state 1, Alice prefers San Lorenzo to the Palazzo. So if she thinks that Bob is going to play the left column, she will play the top row. Furthermore, Bob will play the left column. Why? Because no matter what Alice does, Bob is better off going left. If Alice chooses the top row and Bob goes left, he gets San Lorenzo. If he goes right, he gets the zoo. But Bob prefers San Lorenzo to the zoo. If Alice chooses the bottom row and Bob goes left, he gets the Palazzo. If he goes right, he gets the catacombs, but Bob prefers the Palazzo to the catacombs, so Bob will choose the left column, and that means that the predicted outcome, if state 1 is the state, is that Alice will go left. Sorry, Alice will choose the top strategy, and Bob will choose the left column. And the outcome will be San Lorenzo, which is exactly what the foundation would like to choose in state 1. And notice that in state 2, by exactly the same kind of arguments, Alice will play the bottom strategy, Bob will play the right column, and the outcome will be the catacombs. And the catacombs is exactly the right choice in state 2. So this little mechanism gives us exactly the right outcome, no matter whether state 1 or state 2 is the actual state. We get San Lorenzo in state 1, we get the catacombs in state 2. We say that this mechanism implements the foundation's goals because we get exactly the outcome that the foundation would like to have. Now, I've shown you 3 examples: cake, energy, and restoration. And in all 3 examples, I've produced a solution. You might say, how did I know that there was a solution? Well, it turns out that there is a general method. The mechanism design provides a general method for finding the general solution. Don't worry, I'm not going to show you that general method this morning, but if you happen to be interested in it, you can read my paper of 1977. It's actually quite an old paper now, 35 years old, but it provides the general solution to finding mechanisms in situations like this. What I hope that I have convinced you of this morning, though, is that mechanism design can be a useful tool for problems that are facing this region of the world, the region of southern Italy. It can also be used, I should mention, for global problems as well. Again, I'm not going to go into it, but it could be used to solve problems of climate change, getting international agreements on carbon emissions. And it can also be used to design mechanisms that will prevent financial crises. Those are topics that I could talk about on another occasion, but for this morning, let me stop here and thank you very much for your kind attention.